The sound of screeching tires tore through the damp night, followed by the shattering crash of metal against concrete. Malik, a 15-year-old boy with a well-worn delivery bag slung over his shoulder, froze mid-step. His heart skipped a beat as the noise echoed through the narrow streets of his neighborhood. It wasn't unusual to hear chaos on a rainy night in the city, but this wasn't the distant wail of a siren or the hum of traffic. This was different, urgent, immediate. Dropping his bag to the ground, Malik broke into a sprint, the rain pelting his hoodie and sneakers as he darted toward the intersection. The source of the noise came into view. A luxury car had careened into a lamppost, the front crumpled like an accordion. Smoke hissed from beneath the hood, illuminated by the flickering glow of the damaged streetlight above. The steady drum of rain added an eerie rhythm to the scene. He skidded to a halt near the car. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks, and the driver's side window was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the pavement like diamonds. Inside, a figure slumped against the steering wheel. For a moment, Malik hesitated. He wasn't sure what he was. Walking into an accident, maybe, but the silence from inside the vehicle felt unnerving. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out, his voice breaking through the patter of rain. The figure stirred slightly. A faint groan escaped, muffled by the rain and the hiss of steam from the engine. The woman's head turned toward him, her face pale and contorted with pain. Malik noticed her swollen belly, her hands trembling as she struggled to unbuckle her seatbelt. Without hesitation, Malik rushed to the driver's side door, pulling at the handle. It didn't budge. He ran around to the passenger side, his sneakers slipping on the wet pavement, and tried again. This time, the door creaked open, allowing him to crawl inside. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and burnt oil, making his stomach churn. "I'm gonna get you out of here, okay?" he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. The woman's eyes flickered open, her gaze locking onto his. Malik could see the desperation there, mixed with something else. Fear, not just of the accident, but of something more. The seatbelt was jammed, cutting into her shoulder. Malik reached for the release button, his fingers slick with rainwater and sweat. "Hold on," he muttered, yanking at the strap until it gave way. She gasped, her body lurching forward as he supported her weight. Her breathing was shallow, her hands clutching her stomach protectively. "Can you walk?" Malik asked. She nodded weakly, though her steps were unsteady as he helped her out of the car. They stumbled toward the sidewalk, the rain plastering her hair to her face and soaking through Malik's hoodie. He kept a firm grip on her arm, glancing over his shoulder at the wrecked car. The situation felt off, like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "You saved me." Before Malik could respond, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Near the car, something glinted on the ground, a small black flash drive, partially hidden among the shards of glass. Without thinking, Malik bent down and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't know why, but the instinct to take it felt immediate, almost urgent. As they moved farther from the wreck, headlights illuminated the scene. A black SUV rolled to a stop, its tinted windows reflecting the orange glow of the flickering streetlight. Malik's chest tightened. The vehicle didn't look like an ambulance or police car, and the tension in the air was palpable. The woman's grip on his arm tightened. "We need to go," she said, her voice trembling. Malik didn't hesitate. He guided her into a nearby alley, the shadows swallowing them as the sound of car doors opening reached his ears. The rain masked their footsteps as they weaved through the maze of narrow paths Malik knew by heart. When they finally stopped, Malik leaned against a wall, his chest heaving. The woman sank to the ground, clutching her stomach. "Who were they?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer immediately, her eyes darting toward the entrance of the alley. Finally, she looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and dread. "I don't know who to trust," she admitted, "but you might be my Only chance. Malik's mind raced. He had no idea who she was or what he had just stumbled into, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just an accident, and the small object in his pocket, now heavy with significance, felt like the key to something much bigger. The morning after the accident, Malik woke to the sound of heavy knocking. It wasn't the casual rapping of a neighbor or a delivery person. It was insistent, sharp, and deliberate. His grandmother, wrapped in a faded floral robe, shuffled toward the door with a look of concern etched across her face. Malik was still pulling on his hoodie when she opened it to reveal two uniformed police officers standing on the porch, their presence casting a heavy shadow over the modest living room. "Good morning, ma'am," one of the officers said, his tone clipped but polite. His partner's gaze darted past her, scanning the room with practiced precision. "We're here to speak with Malik Johnson." Malik froze in the hallway. His heart thudded in his chest as he stepped forward, the memory of the previous night flooding back. The woman, the car, the mysterious black SUV, it all felt distant and surreal in the bar. Light of day. But now, with the officers standing in his home, it was clear this wasn't over. "Yeah, that's me," Malik said, trying to keep his voice steady. The officer's eyes landed on him, sharp and assessing. "We understand you were involved in an incident last night," the officer began. "A car accident on Westbrook Avenue. You assisted a woman, correct?" Malik nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, I helped her get out of the car. She was hurt pretty bad." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. "That was a brave thing to do, but we have a few questions we need you to answer." Malik exchanged a glance with his grandmother, who gave him a slight nod of encouragement. He stepped onto the porch, the cool morning air biting at his skin. The officers didn't wait to invite him to sit. They dove straight into their questions. "What were you doing in that area so late at night?" The first officer asked, his pen poised over a small notebook. "I was finishing a delivery," Malik explained. "I was heading home when I heard the crash." "And how did you come to find Ms. Eleanor Gray?" The second officer chimed in, his tone less friendly than his partner's. "She was stuck in the car," Malik said, frowning. "I helped her out. That's it." The officers exchanged a glance, and Malik's stomach churned. Something about their expressions made him feel like he was being evaluated, not as a witness or a hero, but as a suspect. "You didn't notice anything unusual at the scene?" the first officer pressed. "Anyone else there? Any suspicious activity?" Malik hesitated. He thought of the black SUV, the strange men, and the way Eleanor had clutched her stomach like she was hiding more than physical pain. But instinct told him to tread carefully. "No," he lied. "It was just me and her." The officer's pen hovered over the page for a moment before he jotted something down. "And after you left, did you take anything from the scene? Something you might have found near the car?" Malik's pulse quickened. His hand instinctively brushed against the pocket of his jeans where the flash drive still sat. "No," he said firmly. "I didn't take anything." The officer studied him for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "All right, that'll be all for now. But if you remember anything or find anything, let us know immediately." As the officers turned to leave, Malik's grandmother stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Why is he being questioned like this? My grandson saved a life. Why are you acting like he did something wrong?" The first officer hesitated. "We're just following up, ma'am. There are complications with this case." "Complications," she repeated, her eyes narrowing. But before she could press further, the officers were already walking back to their car. Malik watched them go, a heavy weight settling in his chest. He knew the flash drive was important, too important to hand over without understanding its significance. As he closed the door behind him, his grandmother placed a hand on his shoulder. "What aren't you telling me, Malik?" she asked softly. He looked at her, guilt gnawing at him, but he couldn't bring himself to explain. "Nothing," he said quietly. "It's nothing." That night, Malik sat on his bed, the flash drive turning over in his fingers. His curiosity was a live wire sparking in his mind. Finally, unable to resist, he plugged it into his battered laptop. The screen flickered, and a folder appeared. Operation Keystone. Inside were dozens of files, documents, emails, and videos. Malik clicked on the first file, his eyes scanning the words as dread settled over him. It detailed a network of corruption, implicating powerful figures in schemes that ranged from money laundering to human trafficking. It was more than Malik could process in one sitting, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Eleanor Gray. This was a conspiracy that reached far beyond her. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the window. Malik froze, his heart leaping into his throat. Slowly, he turned to see a shadowy figure standing just outside. The outline of a man, his face obscured by the reflection of streetlights, sent a jolt of fear through Malik. The figure raised a finger to his lips, a silent warning. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, the man disappeared into the night. Malik slammed his laptop shut, his hands trembling. He didn't know who that man was or what he wanted, but one thing was certain. He wasn't safe. Not anymore. Malik barely slept that night. Every creak of the house sounded like a threat. Every shadow outside his window felt like it harbored danger. He kept his laptop open on his desk, the contents of the flash drive staring back at him like an unanswered question. The words Operation Keystone burned in. His mind, a mystery too heavy for someone his age, but one he couldn't ignore. By morning, Malik knew he had to act. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The first thing he did was head to the public library, where he often went to study when his home felt too cramped or chaotic. The library was quiet, its rows of books a comforting contrast to the storm brewing in his life. Malik found a corner seat near the computers and plugged in the flash drive once more. He skimmed through the files, his eyes widening as he uncovered the depth of the conspiracy. The documents detailed government, contracts funneled to shell corporations, evidence of bribes paid to judges, and most shockingly, the names of victims, people whose lives had been destroyed by these schemes. One file caught his attention, a video marked Confidential Eleanor Gray Testimony. Malik hesitated before clicking. The video opened to a grainy recording of Eleanor sitting in what looked like a secure room. She spoke calmly, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "This isn't just about corruption," she said, her voice firm. "This is systemic. The people behind this operation are embedded in every level of our institutions. If this gets out, they'll stop at nothing to silence anyone involved, including me." Malik's stomach twisted. He realized the flash drive wasn't just dangerous. It was a ticking time bomb. The more he uncovered, the more he understood why Eleanor had been targeted and why the police had come to his door. He wasn't just a witness anymore, he was a liability. As he closed the video, Malik felt a tap on his shoulder. He jumped, slamming the laptop shut and turning to see a man in a crisp suit standing behind him. The man smiled, but his eyes were cold. "Malik Johnson?" he asked, his voice smooth but with an edge of menace. Malik's heart raced. "Who's asking?" "I'm just here to talk," the man said, holding up his hands as if to show he meant no harm. "You've come across something that doesn't belong to you, and my employers are very interested in getting it back." I don't know what you're talking about," Malik said, trying to keep his voice steady. He reached for the flash drive, but the man's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. "Let's not make this difficult," the man said, his smile disappearing. "Hand it over, and we can forget this ever happened." Malik yanked his arm, free and bolted, shoving the flash drive into his pocket as he darted between the bookshelves. He could hear the man's footsteps behind him, steady and relentless. Malik's mind raced as he scanned for an exit. Finally, he spotted a fire door at the end of the aisle. Without thinking, he pushed through it, triggering an alarm that echoed through the library. He ran into the alley behind the building, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. He didn't stop until he reached the main road, blending into the crowd of pedestrians. His mind was a blur of fear and adrenaline. He couldn't go home. That was the first place they'd look, but where could he go? Malik's thoughts turned to Eleanor. She had answers and he needed her help. But how could he find her? The last he'd seen her, she was being taken away in an ambulance. If she was still alive, she'd be under heavy protection. Or heavy surveillance. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. The number was unlisted. Malik hesitated before answering. "Malik," a familiar voice said on the other end. It was Eleanor. Her voice was weak but determined. "I know you have the flash drive. Listen carefully." Before she could finish, the line went dead. Malik stared at the phone, his mind racing. The call confirmed two things. Eleanor was alive, and she was in just as much danger as he was. If they wanted the flash drive this badly, it meant it was his only leverage. He had to find her, not just to protect her, but to ensure the truth came out. The stakes were higher than ever, and Malik knew he was out of his depth, but he also knew one thing for certain: he couldn't turn back now. The tension in Malik's small kitchen was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eleanor Gray sat across from him, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but sharp with determination. She sipped from the tea his grandmother had offered, her fingers lightly trembling against the porcelain. Malik could feel the weight of her unspoken thoughts, as if the room itself was bracing for what was to come. "We don't have much time," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but there was a thread of urgency that she couldn't mask. "The men who attacked me, who are now after you, are relentless. They know you have the flash drive. That alone makes you a target." Malik clenched his fists under the table. The flash drive felt like a lead weight in his pocket, a burning reminder of the chaos that had erupted in his life over the past 2 days. "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly, his voice tight with frustration. "I was just trying to help you." Eleanor nodded, her expression softening. "I know, and I'm sorry you've been dragged into this, but we're in this together now, and we have a responsibility to see it through." Before Malik could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. He grabbed it, his heart sinking when he saw the text from an unknown number. "We know you have it. Hand it over, or your family pays the price." The message was as cold as the pit forming in his stomach. He slid the phone across the table to Eleanor, who read it with a grim expression. "They're getting bolder," she murmured. "This isn't just a threat. It's a warning." Malik felt the walls of his world closing in. He looked at his grandmother, who was hovering by the stove, her face lined with concern. "Nana, I need to go," he said, standing abruptly. "I have to take care of something." Her brow furrowed. "Malik, what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since that night. Is this about the woman you helped?" He hesitated, glancing at Eleanor, who gave him a subtle nod. "It's complicated," he said carefully. "But I promise, I'll explain everything later. Right now, I just need you to trust me." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his cheek. "I don't like this, Malik, but I trust you. Just promise me you'll be safe." "I promise," he said, though the words felt hollow. He didn't know if safety was even an option anymore. Eleanor stood, her demeanor shifting into one of quiet command. "We need to move quickly. They're watching your house, and it's only a matter of time before they make a move." Malik grabbed a small backpack and stuffed a few essentials inside: a phone charger, a water bottle, and the flash drive, which he tucked into a hidden compartment. He cast one last look at his grandmother, who watched him with tear-filled eyes. "I'll come back, Nana. I swear." Eleanor's car was a plain, nondescript sedan, chosen specifically to blend into the chaos of city traffic. As they pulled out of the driveway, Malik caught sight of a black SUV parked down the street. Its tinted windows gave away nothing, but he could feel the weight of its presence, like a predator waiting for the right moment to pounce. "They're tailing us," Eleanor said, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. "Hold on!" The SUV roared to life, its headlights locking onto them like a spotlight. Eleanor pressed down on the accelerator, weaving through the narrow streets of Malik's neighborhood with practiced precision. Malik gripped the edge of his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. "How do you know how to drive like this?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. Eleanor managed. A wry smile. I wasn't always a judge. There was a time when I had to navigate situations like this on a regular basis. The car swerved onto a main road, narrowly avoiding a collision with a delivery truck. The SUV was relentless, its engine growling like a beast on the hunt. Malik turned to look. Out the back window, his stomach twisting as the distance between them shrank. "They're getting closer," he shouted. Eleanor's gaze flicked to him briefly. "There's a construction site up ahead. We might be able to lose them there." The sedan barreled into the site, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Workers shouted and scattered as the car wove through half-finished structures and piles of equipment. The SUV hesitated for a split second before following, its tires spinning against the loose gravel. Eleanor spotted a narrow gap between two stacks of steel beams and made a sharp turn, the car scraping against one of the stacks with a loud screech. The SUV tried to follow, but clipped the edge of the beams, sending them crashing down and blocking the path. "We've got a little breathing room," Eleanor said, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. "But it won't last long." She pulled into an abandoned parking garage and killed the engine. The silence was deafening after the chaos of the chase. Malik slumped back in his seat, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "This is insane," he muttered. "How am I supposed to keep my family safe when these guys won't—" "Stop!" Eleanor reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out, Malik, but we have to stay smart. The flash drive is our leverage, and as long as we have it, we have a chance." Malik nodded, though the weight of her words felt crushing. He didn't want to be a hero or a martyr. He just wanted his life back, but deep down, he knew there was no turning back now. The only way out was forward. The air in the parking garage was thick with dust and silence, broken only by the distant hum of engines echoing from the streets above. Malik sat with his head in his hands, trying to steady his breathing. Eleanor leaned against the car, scanning the area with sharp, calculating eyes. The dim lighting cast long shadows, making every creak and shift feel like a threat. "We can't stay here," Eleanor said, breaking the silence. "They'll regroup and sweep the area." Malik looked up, frustration and fear etched into his face. "Where are we even supposed to go? They're everywhere, and I can't. Won't keep running forever." Eleanor crouched beside him, her tone softening. "I know this feels impossible, but you've already done more than most people would. You saved my life, Malik. You didn't have to, but you did. That means something." Her words hung in the air, offering a flicker of reassurance. But Malik wasn't sure if it was enough. He had grown up learning that the world didn't reward people like him for doing the right thing. Yet here he was, caught in the middle of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond anything he could have imagined. Eleanor straightened, pulling her phone from her pocket. "There's someone I trust, someone who can help us, but contacting them is risky. If the cartel's tracking my devices, it'll lead them straight to us." Malik stood, pacing in small circles. His mind raced, weighing the options. "What kind of help are we talking about?" Eleanor hesitated. "An investigative journalist. He's been working on exposing the cartel's influence for years, but he's hit walls because of corruption. The flash drive has the evidence he needs." "A journalist?" Malik frowned. "How do you know he won't sell us out?" "I don't," she admitted, "but he's our best shot. If we can get the information to him, it'll shine a light on everything. They won't be able to bury this." Malik crossed his arms, his instincts warning him against trusting anyone outside his circle. But the weight of the flash drive in his pocket reminded him that he couldn't do this alone. "Fine, let's do it. But if this guy even looks like he's going to betray us—" "He won't," Eleanor interrupted, her voice firm. "I'll make sure of it." Eleanor dialed a number and turned away, speaking in hushed tones. Malik leaned against the car, his nerves on edge. Every sound outside the garage felt like a prelude to disaster. He glanced toward the exit, half expecting the SUV to come roaring back through the shadows. When Eleanor returned, her expression was guarded. "He's willing to meet, but we have to move fast. He's set up a secure location." "Where?" Malik asked. An old factory on the edge of town, she replied. It's abandoned, so we'll have privacy, but we'll need to stay out of sight until we get there. The factory loomed ahead like a relic of another time, its crumbling walls and shattered windows silhouetted against the night sky. Eleanor parked the car a few blocks away, and they approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as they crept through an overgrown yard littered with rusted machinery. "Are you sure this guy's legit?" Malik whispered. Eleanor nodded. "If anyone can help us, it's him." As they neared the entrance, a figure, stepped out from the shadows. He was tall and lean, with a camera bag slung over one shoulder and an air of cautious confidence. His sharp features were partially obscured by a baseball cap, but his eyes scanned the area with practiced precision. "Laura," the man greeted Eleanor, using her first name. "You look worse for wear." "I've had better weeks," she replied dryly. "Malik, this is Jacob Hayes." "Jacob, this is Malik. The reason I'm still alive." Jacob offered Malik a nod, his expression curious. "You've made some powerful enemies, kid. But from what I hear, you're holding all the cards." Malik shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not trying to hold anything. I just want to keep my family safe." Jacob's gaze softened. "I get it. But if we're going to take these guys down, we need to work together. Do you have the drive?" Malik hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. She gave him a small nod, and he reluctantly pulled the flash drive from his pocket. Jacob reached out, but Malik didn't let go immediately. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "Expose the truth," Jacob replied. "I've got a secure network set up. We'll release the information in stages, enough to keep the cartel and their friends scrambling while we gather more evidence." Malik finally released the drive, though his unease lingered. "And what happens to us while you're doing that?" Jacob smirked faintly. "We make sure you stay alive. That's the deal." Before they could say more, the sound of tires screeching echoed. In the distance, Jacob's expression darkened. "They found us. We need to move. Now." Eleanor grabbed Malik's arm, pulling him toward a staircase leading to the upper floors. Jacob followed, his camera bag swinging as he ran. The factory became a labyrinth of corridors and stairwells, each turn bringing them closer to safety, or so they hoped. As they reached the top floor, Jacob stopped abruptly, pointing to a series of metal beams overlooking the main entrance. "We can set a trap," he said. "If we time it right, we can block their path and buy ourselves time to escape." Eleanor nodded, already moving to position herself. Malik hesitated, his fear warring with a growing sense of resolve. He wasn't a fighter or a hero, but he couldn't stand by and let the people around him take all the risks. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Jacob glanced at him, surprised but impressed. "Help? Me rig the beams. Let's show them they messed with the wrong people." As the sounds of the cartel's men grew louder, Malik worked alongside Jacob, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. For the first time he felt a flicker of hope, not just for survival, but for the chance to fight back. The air inside the factory was stifling, thick with the tension of impending danger. Malik tightened his grip on the wrench Jacob had handed him, his knuckles white as they scrambled to finish rigging the beams. Every creak and groan of the building echoed through the hollow corridors, masking the distant voices of the cartel's men closing in. "Hold that steady," Jacob instructed, his voice low but urgent. He secured a chain around the rusted support beams. "If we time this right, the weight will collapse their entry point and buy us the window we need." Malik nodded, though his heart pounded, in his chest. This wasn't the kind of battle he'd ever imagined himself in. Hours ago, his only concern was keeping his grandmother safe and making enough money for their next meal. Now, he was standing in an abandoned factory, preparing to face armed men with nothing but ingenuity and sheer will. Eleanor crouched near a window overlooking the entrance, her posture tense but focused. She had shed the vulnerability he had seen earlier, replaced by the steely determination of a woman who had spent her life navigating life and death stakes. She turned to them, her voice calm but commanding. "They're here. Malik's breath hitched. From his vantage point, he could see flashlights cutting through the darkness, accompanied by the low hum of muffled voices. The cartel's men were moving methodically, spreading out as they approached the factory. "Once they're inside, we pull the chain," Jacob reminded them, glancing at Malik. "But only when I give the signal. Timing is everything." Malik swallowed hard, nodding again. He tightened the last bolt on the chain, double-checking his work. His mind raced with doubts and fears, but he pushed them aside. This wasn't just about him anymore. Eleanor's life, his grandmother's safety, and the truth they were carrying, all of it depended on what they did next. The first man entered cautiously, his weapon raised as his eyes scanned the shadows. Another followed, then another. Their movements were calculated, their voices clipped as they relayed information back to someone outside. Malik could feel his palms sweating as he watched from above. "Wait for it," Jacob whispered, his eyes locked on the scene below. "Not yet." Malik's fingers hovered over the chain, every second stretching into an eternity. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, drowning out the quiet shuffling of boots on concrete. More men entered, spreading out into the open space of the factory floor. "Now," Jacob hissed. With a sharp yank, Malik and Jacob pulled the chain together. The beams groaned under the sudden shift in tension before giving way with a deafening crash. A cloud of dust and debris erupted as the entryway collapsed, trapping several men beneath the rubble and cutting off reinforcements outside. Chaos ensued. Shouts of confusion and anger filled the air as the remaining men scrambled for cover. Eleanor used the momentary distraction to fire a single, precise shot from her concealed weapon, hitting the cartel leader's radio. Sparks flew as the device shattered, severing their ability to communicate with their team. "Go!" Eleanor shouted, motioning for Malik and Jacob to follow her deeper into the factory. The trio moved quickly through the labyrinth of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. Eleanor led the way, her instincts sharp as she navigated the maze-like structure. Malik struggled to keep up, his legs burning with exertion, but he forced himself to push through. "Where are we going?" he panted, glancing over his shoulder to see the cartel's men regrouping. "There's a back exit," Eleanor replied. "If we can reach it, we'll have a clear path to the rendezvous point." "And if we don't?" Malik asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "We don't have a choice," Eleanor said firmly. "Keep moving." Jacob brought up the rear, pausing every few steps to create small diversions, overturned barrels, makeshift barricades, anything to slow their pursuers. His quick thinking gave them precious seconds, but it was clear the cartel's men weren't giving up. As they rounded a corner, Malik stumbled over a loose piece of metal, nearly losing his footing. Eleanor grabbed his arm, steadying him. "You okay?" "Yeah," he managed, though his lungs felt like they were on fire. "Just keep going." Ahead, the faint outline of the back exit came into view, a heavy metal door, partially obscured by debris. Hope flickered in Malik's chest, but it was short-lived. The sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors, accompanied by the sharp ping of bullets ricocheting off metal. "They're closing in!" Jacob called out, urgency lacing his voice. Eleanor reached the door first, throwing her weight against it. It groaned but didn't budge. "It's jammed," she muttered, frustration flashing across her face. "Malik, help me!" He rushed to her side, pushing with all his strength. The door shifted slightly, but not enough to open. Jacob joined them, and together they forced it open just enough to squeeze through. "Go!" Eleanor ordered, ushering Malik through the gap. Jacob followed, and Eleanor slipped through last, slamming the door shut behind her. They emerged into the cold night air, the factory's perimeter bathed in the eerie glow of distant streetlights. For a moment, they allowed themselves to breathe, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. But their respite was brief. The cartel's men were relentless, and it wouldn't be long before they found another way out. "Where now?" Malik asked, his voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and fear. Eleanor checked her. "Watch," her expression grim. The journalist's safe house isn't far. If we can make it there, we'll have a chance. Jacob pulled out a map, tracing a route with his finger. It's risky, but if we stick to the alleys and avoid main streets, we might stay ahead of them. Might, Malik echoed, raising an eyebrow. It's all we've got, Jacob replied. You in? Malik hesitated, glancing back at the factory. He thought of his grandmother, of the quiet life he had tried so hard to protect. But he also thought of Eleanor's words, the weight of the truth they carried, the lives that depended on it. He squared his shoulders, determination hardening his gaze. I'm in. Eleanor gave him a small, approving nod. Good, let's finish this. As they disappeared into the shadows, the distant sound of sirens began to rise, signaling the chaos left in their wake. For Malik, there was no turning back now. The narrow alleys were damp with the residue of a recent rain, and the faint glow of streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows. Malik's breaths came in ragged gasps as he followed Eleanor and Jacob through the maze-like streets, his heart pounding in his chest. The safe house was close, but every step felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Jacob stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Wait, he whispered, peering around the corner of a dilapidated building. Something's off. Eleanor moved beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the street ahead. It looked empty, but years of experience told her appearances could be deceiving. What do you see? She asked, her voice low. Jacob pointed to a parked van a block away, its windows tinted and engine idling. We've got company. They're waiting for us. How did they find us? Malik asked, panic creeping into his voice. I thought we shook them back at the factory. Eleanor's jaw tightened as a realization dawned on her. Someone tipped them off, she said, her voice edged with anger. This wasn't supposed to happen. Jacob glanced at her, his expression unreadable. What are you saying? One of us? Malik's gaze darted between them, uncertainty blooming in his chest. No way, he said quickly. We're in this together. But Eleanor's eyes didn't soften. She stepped closer to Jacob, her tone accusatory. You were the only one who knew the exact route to the safe house. Jacob raised his hands defensively, but his expression wavered. Hold on, are you seriously accusing me? After everything we've been through? Then explain the van, Eleanor demanded. Explain how they knew exactly where to wait for us. Malik felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He didn't want to believe it, but the tension between Eleanor and Jacob was palpable. If there was a traitor among them, the stakes had just risen exponentially. The standoff was broken by the sudden sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Malik spun around, his eyes widening as a group of armed men emerged from the shadows. They're here! He shouted, instinctively reaching for Eleanor. Run! Eleanor barked, grabbing Malik's arm and pulling him away. Jacob hesitated for a split second before following, the accusation still hanging in the air. The three of them bolted down the alley, the cartel's men hot on their heels. Bullets ricocheted off the brick walls, and Malik ducked instinctively, his heart pounding like a drum. Eleanor led the way, her movements calculated and precise, while Jacob lagged slightly behind. Take the next left, Eleanor shouted over the chaos. Malik followed her lead, but as they rounded the corner, a figure stepped into their path. It was one of the cartel's men, his weapon trained on them. Time seemed to freeze, and Malik's breath caught in his throat. Eleanor didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she raised her own weapon and fired, the sound deafening in the confined space. The man dropped to the ground, and Eleanor grabbed Malik's hand, pulling him forward. Keep moving. The safe house was just ahead, a nondescript building with boarded-up windows and a rusted door. Jacob reached it first, fumbling with a key as Eleanor and Malik covered him. The sound of approaching. Footsteps grew louder, and Eleanor's grip on her weapon tightened. Hurry up, Malik urged, glancing over his shoulder. I'm trying, Jacob snapped, finally managing to unlock the door. They all rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind them. Eleanor bolted it quickly, her chest heaving with exertion. The room was sparse, with only a few pieces of old furniture and a faint smell of mildew. It wasn't much, but it was secure for now. Malik sank into a chair, his legs trembling from the adrenaline. "What the hell just happened?" he asked, his voice shaky. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She paced the room, her mind racing. Finally, she turned to Jacob, her expression cold. "You need to explain yourself." Jacob bristled. "Are you still on that? I've done nothing but help you. Help us, since this started." "Then how do you explain the ambush?" Eleanor pressed. "They knew exactly where to find us." "I don't know," Jacob shot back. "But if you think I'd risk my life to betray you, you're out of your mind." Malik watched the exchange, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Stop," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't helping." Eleanor and Jacob both looked at him, their expressions softening slightly. Malik stood, his hands clenched into fists. "We don't have time for this. If we keep fighting each other, they win." Eleanor sighed, running a hand through her hair. "You're right," she admitted, "but we need to be sure. There's no mole in our group." "There isn't," Jacob said firmly, "and if you can't trust me, we're already doomed." Eleanor studied him for a moment before nodding reluctantly. "Fine, but if I find out you're lying—" "I'm not," Jacob interrupted. "Now, what's the plan?" Malik pulled out the pen drive, holding it up. "This is the plan," he said. "We need to get this information out before they catch up to us." Eleanor nodded. "Agreed, but we can't go directly to the journalist now. The cartel has too many eyes on us." "Then what do we do?" Malik asked. "We create a diversion," Eleanor said. "Something big enough to draw their attention away from us while we make the handoff." Jacob frowned. "That's risky." "So is doing nothing," Eleanor shot back. She turned to Malik. "Are you in?" Malik hesitated, the weight of the pen drive in his hand feeling heavier than ever. He thought of his grandmother, of the community that had already suffered so much. Finally, he nodded. "I'm in." "Good," Eleanor said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Let's make them regret underestimating us." As the trio began to lay out their plan, the sound of distant sirens echoed in the night. Their time was running out, but Malik felt a newfound determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who couldn't, and he wasn't about to back down. The air was thick with tension as Malik, Eleanor, and Jacob finalized their plan in the dimly lit safe house. The faint hum of a generator in the corner was the only sound breaking the silence. Malik stood by the window, his fingers gripping the pen drive tightly as he gazed out into the darkened streets. "We have to move fast," Eleanor said, her tone sharp and determined. She unfolded a crude map of the city onto the table, circling a key intersection with a red marker. "This is where we'll set the diversion. It's a major route for the cartel's movement. If we can draw their attention, it'll buy us enough time to get the pen drive to the journalist." Jacob crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "And how exactly are we supposed to create this big distraction? They're not going to fall for something simple." Eleanor glanced at Malik, her eyes narrowing. "We're not going for simple. We're going for chaos. Malik, you mentioned you have friends in the community who owe you favors. Can you trust them with this?" Malik hesitated, his mind racing. The people he knew were good-hearted, but asking them to put their lives on the line was a heavy burden. Still, he couldn't shake the image of his grandmother and his neighbors, all of whom had already suffered at the hands of the cartel's corruption. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, I can trust them. They'd do it if it meant hitting back at the people who've been hurting us." Eleanor gave him a small, approving nod. "Good. We'll need all the help we can get." Hours later, Malik found himself standing in a crowded basement filled with familiar faces. Friends and neighbors, all from the same community that had raised him, listened intently as he explained the plan. The room buzzed with a mix of fear and determination. "Look, I know this is dangerous," Malik said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But this isn't just about me or Eleanor. It's about all of us. These people have been running our lives, destroying our homes, and treating us like we're nothing. We have a chance to fight back, to expose them for what they are. But I can't do it alone. A murmur spread through the room, and one by one hands went up in agreement. Malik felt a surge of gratitude and pride as he saw the resolve in their faces. "All right," he said, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. "Here's what we're going to do." The plan unfolded with precision as night fell. Malik's friends and neighbors spread out across the designated area, setting up a series of makeshift distractions. Fires were lit in trash cans, car alarms blared, and graffiti appeared on walls, taunting the cartel with messages like, "We know your secrets." Malik and Eleanor watched from a safe distance as the chaos took hold. The cartel's men began to swarm the area, their radios crackling with frantic orders. Malik's heart raced as he saw the community's efforts paying off. The distraction was working. "Now's our chance," Eleanor said, tugging on his sleeve. "Let's move." Jacob trailed behind them, his expression unreadable. Malik couldn't shake the lingering doubt about his loyalty, but there was no time to dwell on it. The three of them slipped through the shadows, heading toward their meeting point with the journalist. As they approached the rendezvous spot, a rundown warehouse on the edge of the city, Malik felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. The plan had gone smoothly so far, but he knew better than to trust in luck. Eleanor raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. She scanned the area, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Something's not right," she murmured. Malik followed her gaze and saw what she meant. The warehouse was too quiet, too empty. The journalist they were supposed to meet was nowhere in sight. "Do you think they got to him?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," Eleanor replied, "or maybe this is a trap." Before they could decide their next move, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the journalist, a middle-aged man with glasses and a nervous demeanor. He held up his hands as he approached. "It's me," he said quickly. "I wasn't followed." Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have the platform ready to release the files?" The journalist nodded, pulling a laptop from his bag. "Everything's set. Just give me the pen drive and I'll upload the data." Malik hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. "Are you sure it's safe?" he asked. "It has to be," Eleanor said firmly. "We don't have another option." Reluctantly, Malik handed over the pen drive, his fingers brushing against the journalist's for a moment. The man quickly plugged it into his laptop and began typing furiously. The screen lit up with lines of code as the files started to upload. "Almost there," the journalist muttered. "Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching broke the tense silence. Malik's heart sank as he saw a convoy of black SUVs pulling up outside the warehouse. The cartel had found them. "They're here!" Jacob shouted, pulling out his weapon. Eleanor grabbed Malik's arm, dragging him toward the back exit. "We need to get out of here." "What about the files?" Malik demanded. "They're already uploading," the journalist said, his voice shaking. "But you need to go. Now!" The next few minutes were a blur of chaos and adrenaline. Gunfire erupted as Malik, Eleanor, and Jacob fought their way out of the warehouse. Malik's mind raced as he dodged bullets, his only thought being to protect the files at all costs. As they burst through the back door and into the night, Malik heard the journalist's voice in his ear, carried on the wind. "The truth is out there now." They didn't stop running until they were far from the warehouse, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Malik turned to Eleanor, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "Did it work?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. "It worked. The world's going to know everything." Malik felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. He knew the fight wasn't over yet. The cartel would come after them with everything they had, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope. They had struck a blow against the darkness, and there was no turning back now. The streets were eerily quiet as Malik, Eleanor, and Jacob approached the community center, now their makeshift command post. The weight of what they had done pressed heavily on Malik's shoulders. The files were out in the world, but the cartel was still on their trail, and it was only a matter of time before they struck back. Inside the community center, familiar faces greeted Malik with a mix of relief and worry. His neighbors and friends had rallied behind him, their resolve hardening with each passing hour. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was theirs, too. Eleanor placed a map on the table and began marking key areas. We have two priorities now: protecting this community and ensuring the cartel's leaders are held accountable. The files were just the beginning. They'll try to discredit everything, maybe even recover the data. Malik stood by her side, his jaw clenched. "What's the plan?" Eleanor glanced at him, her expression grim but determined. "We draw them in. If they want a fight, we give it to them. But we control the battlefield." The plan was set into motion with military precision. Malik's friends worked to fortify the community center, using anything they could. Find to create barricades and traps. Windows were boarded up, entry points were reinforced, and makeshift alarms were rigged to warn of approaching vehicles. Eleanor worked tirelessly, coordinating with her contacts to ensure that the files remained live and accessible. She knew the cartel would try to suppress the information, but she had anticipated their moves, uploading the data to multiple secure platforms. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in an orange glow, Malik found himself standing on the rooftop of the community center. He looked out over the streets he had grown up on, his heart heavy with a mix of fear and determination. Jacob joined him, leaning against the railing. "You've done good, kid," he said after a moment of silence. Malik didn't respond immediately. He watched as his neighbors prepared for the impending confrontation, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. "I just hope it's enough," he finally said. Jacob placed a hand on his shoulder. "It will be. You've given these people something they didn't have before. Hope. That's more powerful than you think." The first sign of the cartel's arrival came in the form of distant headlights piercing through the darkness. The sound of engines revving grew louder, accompanied by the faint hum of a helicopter overhead. Malik's heart raced as he signaled to the others. "They're here," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Eleanor joined him on the rooftop, her eyes scanning the approaching vehicles. "Remember, we stick to the plan. Draw them in, split their forces, and keep them off balance." Malik nodded, his grip tightening on the makeshift radio in his hand. "Let's do this." The first wave hit hard. The cartel's men swarmed the barricades, their shouts echoing through the night. Malik's friends sprang into action, using slingshots and homemade smoke bombs to create chaos. From his vantage point on the rooftop, Malik directed their movements, his voice calm and authoritative. Eleanor and Jacob worked from the ground, coordinating the defense and ensuring everyone stayed out of harm's way. The cartel's forces were larger and better equipped, but the community's determination and resourcefulness evened the odds. As the battle raged on, Malik spotted a familiar figure emerging from one of the SUVs. It was the cartel leader, a man whose face was burned into his memory from the files on the pen drive. He carried himself with an air of arrogance, barking orders at his men. "That's him," Malik said into the radio. "The leader. We need to take him down." Eleanor's voice crackled in response. "Stay focused, Malik. We'll get him, but not at the expense of anyone's safety." The turning point came when Malik and a small group of his friends executed a daring maneuver. Using a series of underground tunnels that ran beneath the neighborhood, they managed to flank the cartel's forces, cutting off their escape route. Malik emerged from the tunnels just as the cartel leader realized he was trapped. The man turned to run, but Malik was faster. He tackled him to the ground, his adrenaline overpowering any fear. "Game over!" Malik said, his voice laced with anger and exhaustion. The cartel leader sneered, his defiance unbroken. "You think this changes anything? You're just a kid." Malik leaned in closer, his gaze unwavering. "Maybe, but this kid just ended your reign." With the cartel leader captured and his forces in disarray, the battle came to an end. The community erupted in cheers as the remaining cartel members fled, leaving behind their vehicles and weapons. Malik stood in the center of it all, his chest heaving as he tried to process what had just happened. Eleanor approached him, a rare smile breaking through her usually stoic demeanor. "You did it, Malik. We did it." Malik shook his head. "It's not over yet. We still have to make sure this sticks." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "And we will. But tonight, you should be proud. You stood up to them, and you won." As the night gave way to dawn, the community began to rebuild. The streets that had been filled with fear and violence hours earlier were now alive with hope and determination. Malik watched as his neighbors worked together, their spirits unbroken. Eleanor stood beside him, her voice soft. "You've given them something no one else could, a reason to believe in themselves." Malik turned to her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "They gave me a reason too. I couldn't have done this without them." Eleanor smiled, a rare moment of warmth in her otherwise hardened demeanor. "That's what makes you a leader, Malik. You inspire people, and that's something they can't take away from you." As the sun rose over the neighborhood, casting a golden light on the streets below, Malik allowed himself a small smile. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time he felt like they had a real chance to win. The sunlight streamed through the windows of the community center, now a symbol of resilience rather than a refuge of desperation. Malik sat in the corner, his eyes fixed on a stack of newspapers spread across the table. Every headline was about the same thing: the fall of a powerful cartel and the bravery of a young boy who dared to stand against them. But Malik wasn't reading the words. He was staring at his reflection in the glossy photograph printed on the front page, a moment captured of him, standing defiantly with Eleanor and the community behind him. It didn't feel real, but the ache in his muscles and the faint scars on his hands were constant reminders of the battles they had fought. Eleanor entered the room. Her usual composed demeanor softened. She carried a small envelope in her hand. "You've made the national news," she said, placing the envelope beside the papers. "But I figured you'd be more interested in this." Malik hesitated before picking it up. The envelope was plain, no markings to indicate its origin. He opened it carefully, his heart racing as he unfolded the letter inside. The words hit him like a wave. "Dear Malik, your courage has ignited a movement. The information you exposed has led to widespread investigations and arrests across multiple agencies. Leaders who believed they were untouchable are now facing justice, thanks to you. Enclosed is something to help you take the next step. The world needs people like you, people who don't just survive, but inspire others to fight for what's right. Never forget, one person can make all the difference. Sincerely, an ally." Inside the envelope was a check with an amount that made Malik's hands tremble. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. Eleanor smiled faintly at his reaction. "It's from an anonymous donor, but I have a feeling I know who it is." Malik shook his head in disbelief. "I didn't do this for money. And that's exactly why you're the kind of person who deserves it," Eleanor said gently. "This isn't payment. It's a chance to build something bigger. Something lasting." Over the following weeks, the community transformed. With the cartel dismantled and corruption exposed, resources began flowing back into the neighborhood. Streets were repaired, schools received funding, and new programs were established to support families who had been neglected for years. Malik poured himself into the work. He used the funds to create a youth center, a place where kids like him could learn, create, and dream. The center was named Second Chances, a testament to the belief that everyone deserves an opportunity to rewrite their story. Eleanor visited often, offering guidance and support. Her own journey wasn't without challenges. Her willingness to blow the whistle had cost her connections and placed a target on her back. But she found solace in the impact of her decisions, especially when she saw the change Malik had inspired. One afternoon, as Malik was teaching a group of kids how to build circuits from recycled materials. Eleanor pulled him aside. "There's something I need to show you," she said, her tone serious. She led him to a nearby room where a television played a live broadcast. A government official was addressing the nation, acknowledging the systemic corruption that had been exposed and announcing sweeping reforms. Among the changes was the establishment of an independent task force to oversee cases like Eleanor's, ensuring accountability at every level. "They're calling it the Grey Act," Eleanor said quietly. "It's named after me, but it wouldn't exist without you." Malik stared at the screen, the weight of what they had accomplished settling in. "It feels surreal," he admitted, "like all of this could disappear in a moment." Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "That's why we keep fighting. This isn't the end, Malik. It's the beginning." Months turned into years, and the ripple effects of Malik's bravery continued to spread. The youth center became a beacon of hope, drawing attention from across the country. Malik received invitations to speak at conferences and events, sharing his story with audiences who were moved by his journey from a boy surviving on the margins to a leader who reshaped his community. Eleanor transitioned into a mentorship role, helping others navigate the complexities of systemic reform. Though she remained in the background, her influence was felt in every corner of the movement she had helped ignite. One day, Malik received a letter from a group of young activists in another city. They had been inspired by his story and were starting their own initiative to tackle issues in their neighborhood. The letter ended with a simple line: "You showed us what's possible. Now it's our turn." Malik folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer alongside the first envelope he had received. He knew that the fight for justice and equality was far from over, but moments like these reminded him why it was worth it. The final scene unfolded. Under a golden sunset, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink, Malik stood outside the youth center, watching as kids laughed and played, their voices filling the air with a joy that had once seemed impossible. Eleanor joined him, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. "You've built something incredible here," she said. "I didn't do it alone," Malik replied, his gaze never leaving the children. "And it's not finished. There's still so much to do." Eleanor smiled, a rare warmth in her expression. "That's what makes you different, Malik. You see the work ahead, but you're not afraid of it." They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the scene before them. Malik finally turned to her, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and determination. "Thank you for believing in me, for giving me a chance." Eleanor's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable emotion in her words. "You didn't need a chance, Malik. You just needed someone to see what was already there." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the center, Malik felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better, and it would continue to get better, one step at a time, because sometimes all it takes is one act of courage to change everything. What impact did this incredible story have on you? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Here at Living Narratives, we pour care and dedication into every story, striving to touch the hearts of our viewers. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next inspiring story. Your support is essential for us to keep bringing these narratives that inspire and transform lives. Like the video, share it with someone you care about, and let us know where you're watching from. Stories like this are crafted to connect and move us all. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next emotional chapter here on Living Narratives.